back to another topic lesson. Now, last week we looked at modern Greece, and I told you that we'd be starting to look at ancient Greece. That will be our next topic. So, today's learning, we're going to start learning all about ancient Greece. So let's have a look through some slides together. Who were the ancient Greeks? So the word ancient means from a very, very long time ago. The ancient Greeks were a civilization, so a time when people were living there, from around 700 BC, before Christ was born. They were great thinkers and inquirers, so they asked lots of questions. Many of their ideas are still used today, over 2,700 years later. Philosophy, architecture, buildings, words, which are very important, drama, poems and stories, education, history, science, and democracy. So democracy is the way that societies vote. So when we want to choose somebody to be our prime minister, we all go and vote as a country, and the one with the most votes gets to be the prime minister. So that is democracy, when you are voting, when it's fair. A little fact here. Did you know the ancient Greeks called their land Hellas and called themselves Hellenes? Interesting. Where are the ancient Greeks from? Now, you will probably be able to tell straight away that the ancient Greeks did in fact live in Greece, but we already knew that. And another fact that we already knew is that Greece is in southern Europe and it's still around today. So we talked about that last lesson, that you might have been on holiday to Greece, you might know about Greece as a country, or you might have family there. And we also talked about where we are. So we are in the United Kingdom and we're in Europe, but we're up here. Greece is in southern Europe and it's down here, it's down towards the south. But we already knew that. So, one interesting question is, how was Greece ruled back then? Now, in the United Kingdom, we've got the Queen, who is in charge of our country. She rules the country. She oversees the government. She oversees what everybody's doing, and she is in charge. So, who ruled Greece back in ancient Greek times? There was never one country called ancient Greece. Instead, Greece was divided up into smaller city-states, like Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and Olympia. Each city-state ruled itself. They had their own governments, laws, and army. So, ancient Greeks living in Sparta considered themselves Spartan first and Greek second. Famously, the city-states didn't get on very well and often fought each other. However, sometimes they joined together to fight against a bigger enemy, like the Persian Empire. Only a very powerful ruler could control all of Greece. One man did in 300 BC. He was called Alexander the Great from Macedonia. Alexander led his army to conquer an empire that stretched as far as Afghanistan and India. So another little fact up here, it says Alexander the Great founded over 70 cities and created an empire that stretched across 3 continents, covering 2 million square miles. So let's learn a little bit more about these small city-states that were in ancient Greece. So the first one, Delphi. Delphi was one of the holiest places in ancient Greece. People travelled from all over the countries to visit a famous priestess called Pythia. She was said to offer advice from Apollo, the god of the sun. Before making her prophecies, Pythia would go into a trance by breathing in vapours rising from a crack in the ground. Delphi was also home to the Pythian Games. These were like the Olympic Games, but included acting, painting, and dancing events, as well as the usual Olympics. Let's look at Olympia. Olympia was home to the ancient Olympic Games. Every 4 years, athletes came from all over Greece to compete in running, wrestling, boxing, jumping, throwing, and horse racing. The Olympic Games were also a religious festival dedicated to the god Zeus. Visitors stared in wonder at the huge gold and ivory statue of him inside the Temple of Zeus. There were also the great altar of Zeus, where 100 oxen were sacrificed in his honor every year. Let's look at Sparta. The Spartans were very serious soldiers, and they spent their entire lives training for battle. Boys left their families when they were 7 years old to begin their 23 years of training to become a soldier. Only those who made it through this grueling system were considered true Spartan citizens. Sparta was ruled by 2 kings, who were supposed to be descendants of Heracles. One king might stay at home, while the other was away fighting battles. The most famous king of Sparta was Leonidas. He led 300 Spartans against the Persians at the Battle of Thermopylae. So that's interesting. If boys left their families when they were 7 years old and they trained for 23 years to become a soldier, how old would they be when they became a soldier? See if you can work that one out. Let's take a look at Knossos. Knossos was the oldest city in Greece. It was located on the island of Crete and was the centre of the Minoan civilization. At the heart of the city was the Palace of Knossos. This vast building had over 1,000 rooms, some decorated with beautiful paintings of dolphins and bulls. Legend has it that Knossos was also home to a man-eating bull called the Minotaur, which roamed the palace labyrinth. Interesting. Let's look at the next one, Athens. Between 500 BC and 400 BC, Athens was the most important city in the world. Many of ancient Greece's greatest thinkers, artists, and writers all lived here. At the centre of Athens is a rocky hill called the Acropolis. This was the site of the city's most important temples. The largest temple was called the Parthenon. Inside, there was a stunning gold and ivory statue of the goddess of the city, Athena. Athens was also the world's first democracy. Instead of being ruled by a king, Athenian citizens would meet to decide how the city should be run. However, not everyone got a say. Women, slaves, and foreigners were not allowed to vote. And lastly, let's take a look at Corinth. Around 400 BC, Corinth was one of the largest and most important cities in ancient Greece. It was located right at the centre of Greece, so was in a good place for trade. Corinthians used a special type of silver coin called a stater. Traders had to use these for buying and selling when they were in the city. On one side of the coin was a winged horse called Pegasus. On the other was the goddess Athena. So that's just a bit of information about how the Greek small city-states were ruled and what happened in each one, because they are all different. So, how can we show that something existed a long time ago if we've not got a lot of evidence? One way we can do this is to show all of it on a timeline, and we've looked at timelines before in year 3 and in year 4. So here's a little example of one. Ancient Egypt was 2000 BC. Ancient Greece was 700 BC. The Romans, 200 BC. The Vikings, 800 AD. The Normans, 1066 AD. The Tudors, 1500 AD. The Victorians, 1800 AD. World War I, 1914. And World War II, 1939. So these are just some key eras and events in history, and the way that we can see where they all fit alongside each other is on a timeline. So that is why timelines are so important. They tell us about events that happened in the past. So if we don't have a lot of evidence or artifacts from these times, we can see where they fit into history. So remember, BC stands for before Christ. So it means before Christ was born. AD means Anno Domini, and AD means after Christ was born. So the ancient Egyptian times happened 2000 years before Christ was born, whereas the Tudors happened 1500 years Anno Domini, so after Christ was born. So let's just take a little look at this Greek timeline that I've made for us. So let's look at this end first, because this is BC, before Christ was born. So this end started first because it's got the bigger numbers. It happened longer ago. 776 BC, the first Olympic Games are held. 700 BC, Homer writes the Odysseys and Iliad poems. 650 BC, the tyrant Kypselos takes over Corinth. 508 BC, male citizens of Athens are allowed to vote. 500 BC, the classical period starts. 472 BC, Greek theatres become popular in Athens. 460 BC, Hippocrates, father of medicine, is born in Kos. 432 BC, the Parthenon is finished in Athens. 388 BC, King Philip II takes control of Greece. 336 BC, Alexander the Great takes control of Greece. And finally, 146 BC, Greece falls under the Roman Empire. So you've got some Greek events in history, and they might come in handy later on. So just remember that you've just learnt about these, you've just read them, they may come in handy later on. Your task today, using the events on the next page, I would like you to put them in order on a timeline. When you've ordered them on the timeline, draw some images next to the events to explain what's happening. An extra challenge: can you add any extra events onto the timeline? Now, look at this one. The timeline goes horizontally across the page. So if I was you, I'd get my piece of paper or whatever it is that you're using, and I'd put it landscape, horizontal, so across, and then I'd draw my timeline horizontal across the page. And then it's up to you how you design your timeline. But please make sure that you put the dates and you write what happened. So let's take a look at your events. So I've got all these amazing Greek events that happened, but silly me, I've got them all muddled up. So I really need you to help me put them in the correct order. So let's just read through what we've got. To make it a bit easier, I've put BC in red so you can see straight away where they are. And I've put AD in blue so you can pick those out as well. So let's start down here. 404 BC, Sparta defeats Athens. 431 BC to 404 BC, a war between Athens and Sparta. 0 AD, Jesus Christ was born. 490 BC, Greeks defeat Persian invaders at the Battle of Marathon. 432 BC, the Parthenon in Athens is finished being built. 146 BC, Romans conquer Greece and it's the end of the Greek Empire. 455 AD, the end of the Roman Empire. 750 BC, early Greek culture. Homer writes the epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. 450 BC, Athens becomes a very powerful city and controls an empire. 776 BC, the first Olympic Games. 440 BC, Greek theatre thrives in Athens. Many of the most famous Greek plays are written. 1896 AD, modern Olympic Games began. And 2020 AD, present day. So remember, the biggest BC numbers start down here. So a big clue, you need to find the biggest number for BC and it will be down here. Another clue, the biggest AD numbers should be up here. So the numbers, the AD ones, you've got 1, 2, 3 and 4, the biggest should be up here and then it should go next smallest, and then the last one should be the smallest number. Remember to email your work to your class teacher. We absolutely love to see your home learning and you may even receive a mention in Friday's celebration assembly. Good luck, keep working hard, and I will see you next week for another topic lesson. Bye for now.